Hi, Dr. Benia. Welcome to my bedroom at my parents' house. So I listened to the podcast about stuttering and stigma with Derek Daniels, and I just have everything like my points written down on my computer, so I'm gonna be looking off to the side. Okay, so the episode's key themes and insights. Basically, the entire podcast was about like the effects of stigma and um basically Derek Daniels just talking about his own experiences with having a stutter and feeling the stigma from being in school, being in workplaces where especially at the time there was not a lot of support for people who stutter. He said that he did not see a speech language pathologist, and he never got any counseling for his stutter at all. He talked about public stigma, self stigma, and anticipated stigma. So, public stigma was stigma from teachers and peers that he talked about, how his teachers and peers would either make comments and jokes, laugh at him, and just not make him feel welcome with his stutter in the classroom. And then he talked about self stigma being and internalized what he put, like where he put the stigma onto himself. Like he thought things about himself that were negative because of what other people around him were acting like. And he said that he just thought he was a bad communicator or like a bad presenter because he had the stutter, when really that is not the case. And then for anticipated stigma, he talked about how, again, like in school, he would count the people in front of him when they were reading aloud in class, when everyone had to like read a paragraph, because he would just know that, oh, I was gonna stutter, like it wasn't gonna be a good thing. And he was just anticipating the like negative reaction from peers or teachers. And he talked about how this was damaging and emotionally difficult, and how it can have an impact on identity, and how it can limit a person who stutters. They might limit themselves because of this stigma that they're facing, whether it be in the classroom, in a workplace, just in public, or with other people in general. And he also talked about awareness. He said people who stutter have multidimensional experiences like everyone else. And he wanted people to understand what can be stigmatized with stuttering, like specifically like jokes was one example that he used. And with awareness, also just that everyone who stutters has a different experience. Not one person who stutters is the same as another person who stutters. And then he also mentioned that, like, for someone trying to, be aware, to be careful with language that we use and don't make assumptions about another person's experience, because it's either not the same as yours or you don't have anything in common with them. And then it's important as a person who stutters to advocate for yourself, and that people experience stigma, but it's not about you, it's about the other person being ignorant. And then my personal reactions for this was like hearing him talk about his experiences in school just like made me upset, because I like remember being in school and like there was kids that like they would just get made fun of for like things that they couldn't control, and that's a stutter is something that like you can't control that. And I felt that this podcast was very eye-opening, because there's a lot of situations where people are like aware of stigma that's happening even if it's not being directed at them, but it's one of those things where it's like they teach you about it in school, they tell you about it, but you don't hear it from a perspective of someone that like lived through it, like Derek Daniels had talked about this through this whole podcast. And it's just like, it was very interesting to hear his perspectives, because obviously I feel like everyone has been made fun of in school for something or another. Like, I mean, I have glasses and I don't think I've ever worn them in class this semester yet, but I've had glasses my whole life, and it only took one comment for someone, like from someone, for me to like not want to wear them anymore. So it's a very tough subject, but it like needs to be talked about. That's like my personal reaction. And then some of the questions that I had made were, how can schools reduce stigma around stuttering? How does gender influence the experience of a person who stutters? And like stigma around that, like how does being like a boy in school versus a girl in school stuttering, like how does that impact the stigma that they face? And then how can stigma about stuttering impact a person's identity beyond their stutter? Like how does that impact their career or their relationships? This is way longer than 3 minutes. I'm very sorry.